Okay, today I want to discuss anonymous sources because recently there was a blatant example highlighting the severe problems that arise with that specific type of journalistic reporting, and it has now become so obvious it should be impossible to ignore. Before really diving in, a word from today's video sponsor, and keep in mind, sponsors are tremendously important to the channel, so a big thank you to the folks over at Izzle Games. QV is coming to Steam. I first saw this game on the Lazy Peons channel, I believe. He has amazing content, by the way, definitely check him out. And I remember thinking, that looks like a cute indie game. I wouldn't mind being sponsored by something like that in a world where so many horrible mobile games are the only thing that pops up all over YouTube. Well, not long after, I had the opportunity to do exactly that, and now QV is coming to Steam on the 18th. The game has a lot of personality. You effectively embark on an interdimensional puzzle adventure for both beginners and experts, using the main character QB to paint your way to new worlds. There are colorful companions, costumes, and cosmetics that you find as you make your way through the different levels, and the soundtrack is extremely upbeat and very whimsical. With a total of 172 different combinations for levels and difficulty options, QV has a lot of content for its price, which is $14.99, and has been crafted with a great deal of care to become a colorful, honestly even heartwarming adventure that is now making its way to Steam after its previous release on Nintendo Switch. Personally, I just like puzzle games. I always have, so it was already something that I enjoyed, and since I can't get to nearly enough indie games for the Indie Spotlight series itself, I thought this would be a great partnership to showcase the game for anyone interested. There are additional playable characters, as well as support for a total, I believe, of 7 different languages. You can add the game to your Steam wishlist right now, link down below in the description, and official launch comes on the 18th. Big thank you to QV and Izzle Games for sponsoring the channel. Back to the video. The subject for today, surprise, surprise, is Kotaku. Now, I had actually been hoping that Kotaku would be turning over a new leaf recently in the wake of its long-standing editor-in-chief stepping down, but sadly, I was completely wrong. Lingering pillars of the outlet's failed moral and ethical principles have persisted, and one such figure is Nathan Grayson. His most recent article, or if not his most recent publication of note, focuses on CIG, Cloud Imperium Games, and the snowstorm that swept across Texas, affecting their offices in Austin. CIG is the developer behind Star Citizen, and while I have many gripes with that game from a philosophical point of view, $3,000 ships for a game that has burnt money in a pile for years is not something I really stand behind as quality business ethics or practices, but I have absolutely no problem with the development team themselves or the workers who are tasked with creating the actual product code. I would never wish harm upon them. I have a great deal of empathy as someone who experiences severe winters every single year for those that are not used to the procedures of running their water to prevent pipes from freezing or are unprepared to lose power. And what happened in Texas was not a joke. It was a serious situation with serious consequences and should be discussed with care. With that said, we can look at the title of the article in order to understand partially what was written. Quote, Star Citizen developers fed up after being expected to work during devastating Texas snowstorm, end quote. That's pretty grabby, and also sounds fairly negative. Let's read on. Quote, last month, the entirety of Texas ground to a halt after a colossal winter storm pushed the state's cordoned-off power grid to the brink. Power and heat outages, as well as resulting food and water shortages, led many businesses to temporarily shut down. This included a large number of Texan video game studios. Of those that did not, however, one stands out. Cloud Imperium Games, whose employees' confidence in the company remains shaken after they spent the week trying to juggle work and survival. End quote. This is where we get an idea of what the overall premise will be. This is a condemnation of the CIG leadership, and what's far more important is that this entire piece will hinge exclusively on anonymous sources. Anonymous sources who make numerous accusations against upper management while never revealing who they are or showing any proof at all of what they say. The article feeds a number of quotes into the piece that reinforce the core premise of CIG is a bad company that failed to handle this storm properly, and concludes by citing more anonymous sources who claim that the company only cared about money, not people, which is a tired, overused argument from a certain sect of gaming media contributors who apparently view all corporate enterprise as evil and relentlessly condemn what seem to be standard business practices in a professional environment. To establish the true foundation of why this journalistic practice has become actual garbage at this point, we need to organize some of the specific quotes. Here is where I have to read some of them out loud in order to fully define where it starts so that where we end up eventually can be juxtaposed even better against the lies and manipulations of so-called anonymous sources, which, to be honest, in my opinion, are likely nothing but a fabrication to support this article's originally intended point. Now, bear with me because this isn't even all of the quotes in the article, but even stripping it down to only what's necessary, it's still going to be quite long. Quote number 1. Everyone at CIG has been very understanding and concerned about the situation the Texas team is facing, and we've stayed in constant communication. To which the Kotaku article responds, quote, according to 6 sources who spoke with Kotaku, that part isn't true, end quote. Quote number 2. On Monday, sources said an Austin office manager told employees, many of whom had already lost power, to figure out how to make up for lost work time in the near future, specifically this week/weekend as a first option, according to one source. That source said the office manager continued, assuming roads are clear, we also can manage a few people in the studio. If all else fails, then enter PTO for whatever time you cannot make up. Quote number 3. Head leadership for the company never appeared to acknowledge that we even faced a natural disaster and seemed to completely neglect to communicate our situation to other studios, said one source. Continuing to quote, this lack of awareness was evidenced when some of us were discussing the aftermath of the storm and coworkers from other studio locations asked if we had been dealing with tornadoes, end quote. Why does this matter? Seriously, this is a side note postscript, like I'm just adding this in. Why does that matter at all? What the other people from another studio think happened there? Like, you should be talking to local management. None of this is relevant at all. Quote number 4. I was talking to some other people in the Austin office, and apparently some of the blowback from the other offices is that they were like, oh, they just want a snow day. Why should we give them a snow day? Said another source. This one is completely irrelevant as well, because what employees in separate offices gossip about is not grounds for you to criticize the localized upper management in a crisis. This one is particularly garbage. Quote number 5. I was reached out to by our head of HR about a Women's Week thing happening in March, said one source. No word on, hey, hope everything is okay with you in Austin, and then getting on to what they needed to say. There were others who had issues with the timing of the message and their lack of empathy. I even approached them with the concerns and only received frustration and lack of understanding on why what they did was not okay. Basically was told that we needed to get over it, end quote. This one is honestly just a whiny, I didn't get enough empathy and they didn't check on my feelings good enough type of post. Quote number 6. I was affected by all this very strongly, the source said. I can't begin to make excuses for the decisions that were made. All I can really say is that it feels like there was a breakdown in communication, that the severity of the issue was not fully realized by the people that had the power making these decisions. I believe that there were also people in the studio that still had power and didn't realize that there was such a severe outage. I think it boils down to there were a lot of communication issues about the severity of the situation. End quote. Followed soon after by, again quote, when I heard that response that they were unaware, I was like, they're either gaslighting us or they're admitting to gross incompetence, end quote, said one source. Quoting again, because, yeah, news of the storm was everywhere, end quote. Quote number 7. One source also said that the studio manager and VP of HR have recently been doing damage control by speaking to individuals about their experiences during the snowstorm. This one is hilarious, and this is me talking again, not a quote, because isn't that what they were whining for? More of the how are things with you? How are your feelings? How are your experiences? Do you feel heard and loved? And now it's apparently happening, but it's damage control this time. Quote number 8. I hope studios such as our LA location never have to fret with wildfires coming too close, only to be told to use PTO as they seek shelter, said one source. I want the company to get better, and if they won't listen to employees internally, then maybe externally is our best bet, end quote. Quote number 9. I know it's dragging on a really long time. While I think the company ultimately came to the right decision, that's an important part, CIG's slow and hesitant response and general lack of communication hit hard for employees that are already low on morale and feeling this company doesn't care about them, said one source. With all those things on top of a game that feels like it's coming closer and closer to a gotcha for expensive ships and no actual gameplay, useless features being constantly shoved in and removed, where marketing holds absolute power over any other department, employees start to feel disheartened after a while, end quote. Notice the language. Feel this company doesn't care about them from an internal source makes me wonder why it doesn't say care about us instead. And also, this really strongly feels like someone who just doesn't like the game and doesn't like the marketing or the monetization or the microtransactions or the ships or the direction overall, and is kind of weaponizing that into something entirely different. And lastly, finally, I know that was a lot, quote number 10. I think people are just tired of how this company can be, said another source. It's just about the money and not about their employees. They don't really show they care when it matters most, and they have failed with this time and time again, end quote. Okay, I know that was a lot. It was far more than I would ever normally read, but the premise here requires that we understand what these anonymous sources have said. And keep in mind, every single one of those people is entirely anonymous. There are no identities, job titles, or anything attached to them. Because once we realize what the anonymous sources are saying, we can look at what the actual sources claim. This will also be kind of another lengthy segment, but the satisfaction should be present for this part because actual employees, names, faces, identities, and all from the Austin office are going to be refuting and discrediting this article with a well-deserved amount of shame. Keep in mind, these responses can be viewed through the lens of how they compare to the previous list of quotes and specifically what those quotes say that I just went through. First up, John Crew, the lead designer at CIG. Quote, Kotaku doing their usual poor job of reporting again to suggest other studios and management wasn't aware of the situation is ludicrous. The situation was discussed daily in meetings I was involved in, and there was no expectation of people being available to work in ATX. End quote. Next up, Craiklin, one of the QA testers. It's not just project leads and executives refuting these quotes for their own personal gain. It's a vertical slice of the entire workforce at the company. Quote, this is also somewhat bewildering to me. I have been with Cloud Imperium Games for 6 years now, and this company has been nothing but supportive and understanding. They have helped me through some tough times in ways no other company has. I don't think I would be with CIG as long as I have if any of this were ringing true. I had our studio manager even personally reach out to me to check up on me to see if everything was okay. I had my direct managers offering anything I needed and never had to use PTO for the storm. All for clicks though, I am sure. End quote. Next up, Cinderfall, HR for Cloud Imperium Games. Quote, CIG has always been really good to me. I've not experienced what is being said in this article. They've always been there for me in dire times, especially during my double mastectomy. While I'm not aware of everyone's particular situation, I wanted to talk about my own. End quote. She goes on to describe that situation in much more detail, but for the sake of time, I'll continue on. David Coulson, lead vehicle programmer. Quote, this is a confusing article that annoys me because from everyone I know and work with in Austin, it is not the experience that people have had. CIG has been extremely supporting and helpful throughout this, and this article is just clickbait. End quote. Tyler Whitkin, community director. Quote, this is weird to me. No one on my team had to use PTO at all, and I felt that CIG was extremely flexible/understanding. In fact, I just asked a load of people on the team about this, and it confused everyone. Unfortunately, I think this is an outright lie. Everyone I'm checking with was told to clock in as if they had worked and to focus on personal safety first, not work. If legitimate, maybe a localized issue within a single team, which should and was likely already handled. Damn, gotta get those clicks though, right? End quote. Wikipedia, replying to Tyler, who works in player experience, whatever that department is, quote, this was my experience as well, along with studio managers asking if I needed food, water, or emergency help after my apartment flooded and I lost quite a bit of time, personal items, and living space dealing with it, along with the power outages and lack of water for days, end quote. Jeremiah Lee, concept artist, replying to the article itself posted on Twitter. Quote, we have been constantly reminded to check in on our employees' physical, mental, and emotional safety during the Texas snowstorm. We take our employees' safety very seriously. Clickbaiting on a tragedy that has caused people to lose lives and devastate families is disgusting. End quote. Jill CIG, developer at the studio. Quote, this is becoming a legitimate, frustrating experience for some of us at CIG, at least around me. We just want to make a great game. This kind of reporting can seriously make you wonder why you bother getting up in the morning. Really, great job, Kotaku. Nathan Grayson, really good when you're making developers feel like this. Moving on. Worse than any delay or upset backer could. In a way, though, it just makes me want to prove them wrong. End quote. Knight Rider, senior forum moderator and employee at CIG. Quote, I've been at CIG for several years now and can't say enough about the care and thoughtfulness that Cloud Imperium Games has provided in outreach and ensuring we are supported in and outside of work. CIG is a great company to work for, and I have always been treated well. End quote. Daniel Baker, designer. I know it's dragging on, but it's important. There's even more after this, by the way, but yeah. Quote, I've not seen or heard anything but the contrary to this. CIG have been extremely supportive and understanding since we all started working from home. I have family and friends in the NHS and healthcare that haven't had anywhere near the support we've had. Now that's a problem. End quote. And lastly, Ray Rucroft, sales operations. Quote, I don't want to wade in too much on this other than to say that I've had nothing but love and support from CIG since I joined over 5 years ago and work with many in Austin who feel the same. End quote. There it is, the not so anonymous sources, and when you compare what was said to Kotaku and the way it was spun, despite acknowledging that many of the correspondence where CIG stated that safety comes first and to take care of one's health above all else is legitimate, it starts to showcase the real issue with this particular method of journalism. The truth is, relying exclusively on anonymous sources, if done legitimately that is, which clearly not always is the case, will often become an incredibly difficult thing to do, if not flat out impossible. Really, it can be impossible because of that. When you are actually verifying a story, especially a story with accusations above all else, you need to produce evidence. And evidence is not an easy thing to submit anonymously. Even if you blur out the names, even if you take extra precautions, the mere existence and publication of that evidence can expose a source just by it existing. So simply saying anonymous sources does nothing if you don't do the groundwork to protect the evidence that they contributed as well. However, if you simply say anonymous sources and then put in nebulous or totally unverifiable quotes, your job becomes incredibly easy in contrast. I actually just had a story myself recently that I would consider rather large, at least for my little corner of the internet, about drug dealing and video game housing, but I couldn't actually cover it because of the difficulty behind anonymous sources. I think I had 5 different people who spoke to me. One was too scared to actually say anything of value, which seemed like a common thread. One was so integrated into the situation that they felt they really couldn't even work with me, or they might not even have a home anymore. One gave me pretty much everything I needed, but also expressed that they wanted to remain anonymous for, again, fear of reprisal. And then a couple more were just corroborating certain specific details, but also wanted to be anonymous. In addition, there were a few that I never actually got any meaningful response from at all, so I had a choice. I could go ahead and say, anonymous sources claim, and then level serious accusations at a group of people, which I firmly believe to be true and have seen a portion of evidence to that effect with my own eyes, but it would immediately undermine the credibility of what I am saying if I cannot actually show anything to back up my claims, and if I am not able to attach those claims to a credible source. It would be entirely different if I had sources who were willing, in fact, to come forward without anonymity, and then multiple others who also desired it. But when no one will actually give you evidence you can show, so your ultimate video or article, whatever it is, contains nothing substantial, and on top of that, the claims that you make are antagonistic in nature, you're clearly attacking someone or something, some entity or group, well, I hope it becomes clear that anonymous sources can in fact be the death of a real story. However, if you are willing to just publish anything at all, regardless of whether it's true, verified, or legitimate, or better yet, if you are willing to just make shit up and put it on your website, anonymous sources become a vehicle to fame and fortune. You can poke around at a company, you can find a thread to pull on, maybe get some stuff that's mediocre at best, perhaps twist it a bit, frame the context just right, and then bam, the anonymous sources spice it up with all sorts of corroborations and quotes that coincidentally lend themselves perfectly to the point you were originally trying to make. It's incredible, and it really is kind of the duality of journalism. You start with a story you want to tell, or you start with trying to find a story to tell. They're very, very different. Journalism might sometimes require anonymous sources, that much is definitely true, but when the sum total of the investigation and report is all purely anonymous, you should look at it with nothing but skepticism, because at best, at absolute best, it is the one-sided portrayal of a narrative designed by the author. And that's the only thing you're getting is specifically one side of their vision with no evidence to support it. It basically could be opinion for all you know. And at worst, at absolute worst, it's flat out manufactured lies, which is actually much more common than you would think, based on nothing but a smokescreen that obfuscates accountability and allows them to publish whatever they feel like under the guise of moral superiority. All existing verifiable accounts show, claim, and corroborate that CIG is a perfectly fine place to work with management that puts in respectable effort, honestly, in my opinion. Everyone with a name, a face, and a job title at all levels of the company confirm this. And I may dislike their monetization practices, but that means nothing within the context of internal employee treatment. Anonymous sources, some of which appear to speak more like random Twitter users than actual employees, claim that they are fed up and that the company mishandled a tragedy. No evidence, no screenshots, and no correspondence whatsoever. No verifiable material of any kind. And one of the only 2 linked items in the entire article is a doomsday climate change rant from Gizmodo. Bottom line, anonymous sources exist, they have their place, but they are becoming a journalistic weapon to reinforce seemingly false narratives at will, at the subjective whim of the author. And at this rate, the words will lose all meaning and become an automatic disqualifying factor when they are used, even under a legitimate premise, which is not a good thing, which this Kotaku article absolutely does not appear to be. I could be wrong about that. Maybe more things surface. I don't know. But evidence taken at face value, the overabundance of evidence at this point in time, suggests otherwise. That's it. Gaming media is in a really rough place right now. Hopefully it can improve, but I don't really have high hopes. If you want to support, there are links down below. Anyone with any interest should sign up and check out Odyssey as a platform, which is a YouTube alternative, and it's very, very rewarding for all its creators, which is great for me, so watch on Odyssey, thank you. Also, locals, $5 a month will support the channel and get you access to completely ad-free uploads and a direct line of communication to me personally. There is another gaming YouTuber to check out, merch, social media, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.